So let's pretend that you're a new control player, or someone that's a new control player comes up to you, and they feel pretty confident about it. What would you say is the thing that they need to be most aware of when they're playing in a field full of so much combo, and then aggressive decks that can be very fast?
So sometimes you're just going to lose games to the nut draw. Like control strength is being very consistent, I think, and being able to punish greedy decks that are trying to like have the nut draw sometimes, but sometimes they sort of have mediocre draws. Control is usually going to have a very similar draw every time. So consistency is important to control, I think.
Cool. Thanks, Shaun. We're going to go down to Kibler Wescoe, and once again I'll repeat a very small portion of his resume. Kibler Wescoe, the winner of Pro Tour San Diego with a very aggressive white-green aggressive deck. I'll repeat myself with the word aggressive. And in Worlds 2011, playing in the modern format, the top 8 was modern, playing white weenie, or at least an aggressive white deck with a splash of blue. What does it take to do the opposite end of the spectrum in a format like modern? Obviously, we saw that there were 2 aggressive decks that were a little bit different than what you're most famous for, which is various forms of white aggressive decks in the form of affinity. I mean, those 2 decks at Richmond being affinity. For something that's more straightforward, like a white aggressive deck, what does it take to succeed when there's so much combo going around?
Well, fortunately, one of the things that white has as probably its best attribute is its sideboard capabilities. So there's a lot of cards like Stony Silence, Rest in Peace, Rule of Law, cards that pretty much answer almost any problem that you can think of. And so, especially when we're trying to beat combo decks, which are traditionally the most difficult things for an aggressive white deck, you have all the tools that you want in your sideboard, so then it comes down to picking which decks you want to be prepared against.
So the deck that you played at Worlds, I remember in I think, very famous match for you, which was unfortunately, from your perspective, the loss versus Conley Woods. In a lot of people's perspectives as spectators, that was one of the most dramatic and dynamic matches they'd seen on camera. And one of the things that happened there is we had the fight of one aggressive deck, Affinity, versus another aggressive deck in the form of the white deck you played. What does it take to be able to beat other aggressive decks?
Well, you want to play your timely reinforcements at the right time. That was my mistake. But yeah, I mean, Tempered Steel isn't really a deck in Modern. Instead, you have the Affinity Robots deck, which is really good, which you don't really need Tempered Steel in that deck.
Just give me that. It's not working.
You looked uncomfortable. It's not working. Just here. You're talking about. I'll get out of the way.
Thanks, Steve. That's our tournament organizer, Steve Port. I think he's the finest tournament organizer in the business. So you were saying, though, aggressive on aggressive, draw your timely reinforcements at the perfect time and pass them at the right time.
Yeah, really there's not a lot of aggro mirrors because, like you said, Affinity is one of the only aggro decks, the other one being Zoo, and that's literally pretty much it. Because with Wild Nicottle in the format, it kind of makes all the other aggressive strategies not very good, except Affinity, which is more synergistic and more explosive. So if you're preparing for the mirror, or for other aggro decks, it's pretty easy because you just are preparing for Affinity and Zoo. Yeah.
Well, since you are so affiliated with, in people's minds at least, with White Weenie, I think that probably it's you and Paul Reitzel as the 2 torchbearers for that archetype. Do you think it has what it takes in the metagame right now, or is it in a rough spot in the metagame?
Well, even if it was rough, I wouldn't think so because, well, I'm always going to play it. I think it was Kibler who made famous White Weenie in all formats, describing me.
That was when you would Rise of the Dark Realm with your opponent's huge mastodon. You were playing white creatures.
There's a green-white hate bears deck, which if you put all the tools together in the right way, then you can pretty much beat a lot of the decks that are popular right now. Again, you have the white sideboard cards like Stony Silence, Rest in Peace. And you also have certain cards like Aven Mind Sensor, which is good against Birthing Pod, which is a really popular deck right now. You have cards that can interact with Twin. You can play like Path to Exile and things like that. You can also run Linvala is a popular one, and then you can even run Leonin Arbiter if you want to go that direction. So there's sort of a lot of options in green-white hate bears too, if that's the sort of route you want to go.
Cool. I'm going to move slightly further down now to brag about the Grand Prix top 8 from the modern Grand Prix where you played Naya. And in addition to Grand Prix San Diego, where you played the Naya deck, you also played in Extended, when Extended was still a living, breathing thing. You won the Pro Tour with Naya, and for a lot of people, in a format where there's so many absurd things that a person can do, you've had some success with basically what's considered something quite fair.
I'm an honest man with honest creatures. You know? The job done.
So this is kind of a mid-rangey aggro kind of space that you've kind of been forging for a long time. I mean, I think for a lot of us, the first time that we saw you really take this by the reins was at Pro Tour Chicago with awesome dragons and some hydras, and you were not playing Fires of Yavimaya like everyone else that was playing those colors in the top 8 of that Pro Tour. What does it take to take the mid-range aggro strategy and have success with it when people are doing kind of absurd things?
I think one of the most important things about constructing and playing successful mid-range decks is identifying what your deck's actually trying to do. A lot of people think of mid-range decks as decks that are just casting 4 and 5 casting cost creatures. And the most important thing, in my mind, in any sort of deck construction, is that your deck has a powerful, proactive strategy that it's implementing. For instance, I think that one of the reasons that a deck like Naya can be powerful in a format where people are comboing whatever is because it is capable of having really powerful starts with things like Wild Title. It's possible that right now the power provided by Wild Title isn't quite where you want to be because cards like Kitchen Finks are super popular out of pod decks. The combo decks that you're fighting against also have creatures that can get in the way, and you need to really have the appropriate tools to react to that. But really, my sort of definition of a mid-range deck is a deck that has a powerful proactive strategy, but isn't focused on just winning the early game. It is able to play more powerful individual cards, trump cards, like things like Knight of the Reliquary, which is my favorite card in Magic, that can win the game by themselves if it goes even slightly longer. It's a sort of card that can be super powerful when you play it as just a 4/4 or 5/5 early in the game, but late in the game, it's just an absolute monster that can win the game by itself.
Right. So it's not Daybreak Nature?
No, it's not.
Just curious.
Still a lot of us.
Noble Hierarch has to be close.
Noble Hierarch's up there too.
So you said you literally raised your hand and you said you weren't sure what you were playing tomorrow.
I don't know.
So is it?
I have a list of a short list.
Is it?
They all have forest.
Is it because right now with mid-range strategies that are not, let's say, Jund-like or the Rock-like, things that don't have Thoughtseize, is it just that they're kind of just stuck in the way that the metagame has been playing out?
I think one of the big issues is that one of the things that mid-range decks are good at is beating aggressive decks. One of the reasons that I was able to be very successful in Pro Tour Austin when I won with Naya was because that was a field that had a lot of aggressive decks. I beat multiple Zoo decks in the top.
Yeah, you had Baneslayers, right?
And my deck was a deck that was tuned to have the aggressive elements of many of these decks, slightly pared down, of course, but also was able to play more powerful individual cards like Knight and Baneslayer, as well as having the Punishing Fire Grove, the Wormbill Will's interaction that could win longer games as well. Right now, in Modern, as I was saying, even the combo decks are decks that are stopping you on the ground. Your aggressive plan of killing with Wild Title is something that even the beatdown decks, or even the combo decks, have ways to interact with. You're running the Kitchen Finks out of Pod. You're running into Tarmogoyf out of Twin. So a lot of the tools that would normally allow you to take an aggressive stance aren't nearly as powerful as they would be in a format where your opponents are playing Curd Apes and you're beating them because you have slightly bigger stuff, or they're playing combo decks that don't necessarily have board presence interaction in the early game.
Gotcha. So hopefully by tomorrow you'll have figured out what you're going to be playing.
I hope so, because I got a registered deck at some point. So.
Cool. Well, I have also some questions that I'll be peppering in, but what I'd like to do is, could you raise your hand should you happen to have a question for anyone on our panel? And if you don't, that's fine. I've got certainly some questions. I see a hand there in the back. Go ahead, just voice out your question, and then if need be, I'll re-voice it as well.
Yes, I had a question big Grand Prix type event where like anyone can play, there's a ton of people, like control decks aren't really as successful. But in the Pro Tour, control decks seem to be quite a bit better. Is that just because it's symptom of all the other people kind of decks, everyone, there's not as many rogue decks going on, so a control deck that's tailored for the popular meta is actually useful? And do you plan on playing more control in like Grand Prix events, or is that more just for like a Pro Tour type of scenario?
Okay, I'm gonna just voice that question again in case we're managing to broadcast.
Yeah.
So the question was that at big Grand Prix, he had noticed that control was not as successful, and that at the Pro Tour it seemed like the control decks were doing better. And the question is this because of the metagame? Perhaps there's less rogue decks out there, and does that mean that at a bigger event, playing control might be more of a risky proposition? Is that about correct?
Yeah, that's about it.
One of the things that scares me about playing a control deck to a Grand Prix as opposed to a Pro Tour is that there'll be less experienced players, and kind of how it happens is you both sort of slow down a little as the inexperienced player is trying to figure out kind of that maybe they haven't played very much against a control deck, so they're trying to really think through the plays. So draws are a concern for me at GPs when I'm playing a control deck. Like I really need to know the deck in and out and be able to make decisions very quickly if I'm going to play it. Another reason behind my deck for that Pro Tour was it was very specifically built to beat Zoo, which I knew was going to be a big thing. And then Zoo sort of died out after that. So the deck definitely needs to evolve. Like if I'm not playing the same list tomorrow for certain. Things have to change from that list. Like control needs to adapt to answer specific problems. So those are my main two concerns. And like you say, an open field for GP, you might just be paired against something you've never even seen and just have completely wrong answers and implode. So yeah, I think control actually is better at PTs, although I'm not exactly certain why, but those might be some of the reasons.
Is exhaustion a factor? I mean, GP day ones are about the longest, grindiest, hardest tournament there is out there, whereas the Pro Tour is a little easier. Does it just get harder to make all decision trees in the control deck over the course of the day?
That is a huge factor, although if you have 3 buys, that's why...
With never mind, you actually play fewer rounds every day.
But exhaustion is
it's only one more round
huge factor as well.
9 and 6.
You're drafting in the Pro Tour, that's fun.
That's a freebie.
Once again, if you have a question, could you raise your hand? Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so this is kind of a question for anyone on the panel, really. It's pretty obvious that Wizards has a definite idea of what the ideal modern format should look like, and I think everyone in this room has their own ideas of what the ideal modern format should look like. So I was curious as to what yours is.
Ban everything till White Wings good.
I'm going to repeat the question in case the internet did not get it. The basic statement, and it's a question for everybody, is that Wizards clearly has one idea of modern, and that each individual might have their own idea of what modern should be. So what are our own ideas of what would be a good modern? And Craig, apparently?
You're going to have to be banning a lot of cards.
I think that the most important thing for any format, really, is that there is diversity, and that there is the ability for the format to evolve and change. And I think that, for instance, I think the reason we saw a Death Ray Shaman ban was that it was that card was so powerful and it was so core to so many different strategies that it was causing a significant amount of homogenization of deck designs, specifically because it's in a color that has Thoughtseize, which is my favorite card, as everyone knows. That can cause that sort of thing, which is like, okay, well, this is a deck that has this really powerful both sort of early game accelerator and late game hate card / engine card that also has access to all of these universally effective reactive tools. It just causes games to just play out the same all the time. And I think that you really want, for any format, a variety of both decks that are played and the actual cards that are showing up in those decks.
I think Modern's in a really good spot right now. Like I might be a bit biased, but I did not like Modern before. But
for a
now
while, didn't like it now.
I'm loving it. Like, I think they're doing very well with the bans, and I hope they just keep doing what they're doing. Maybe ban a few cards, unban a few cards here and there, keep shifting a bit. It's a great format.
I think that Wizards has taken a different approach to Modern than they have to most formats, and it's related to the nature of having an eternal format that they're trying to promote as much as they are Modern. That you need to have sort of more dynamic sort of changes to the format because you can only have so many cards from new sets have big impacts on such a big format. There's so many cards legal in Modern, and so many of them are from eras when development wasn't quite as good, and there's really powerful things. And I think banning and unbanning things, not necessarily just because they are strictly too good or whatever, just for the sake of diversity, I think is actually a good direction in terms of keeping the format interesting and exciting and changing.
There's a limit though to how far you can take that, because part of the appeal of Modern is that I can take my deck to F&M, and in 6 months' time I can probably take my deck to F&M and still play it, and it's still approximately as good. So they have to be very careful. I mean, they don't ban cards lightly. They're very careful about making sure that this will really help and this is a really good idea, because they do want players at all levels of Magic to have these decks that they can take. So they can't just churn it every quarter and be like, oh my goodness, let's blow everything up. You've got to consider the store level play as well.
Absolutely. I mean, you certainly don't want people to be like, all right, I just built my Birthing Pod deck, and now Birthing Pod is banned. And that's actually one of the big concerns, I think, with the Modern ban list, and somewhat the way that it's been managed, is that you could have just people basically just afraid that whatever is perceived to be the best thing right now could just get banned at any moment.
If they chase the deck,
right?
If they chase the deck, it dies.
And yeah, I mean that's I think a real issue that is something that Wizards needs to wrestle with in terms.
Yeah, so I think they'd like to get to a healthy spot and then be like, go for it, enjoy.
But it was also a problem when everyone's deck that they had built was Judd.
No, they will still do it when they need to. But yeah.
Thank you.
Right there.
Hi. Question, I guess, for the panel. Have you ever been on an extended break of playing Magic, several months, 6, 8 months? What did you do to stay sharp when you got back into it, or did you just get crushed hard when you got back into it?
Okay, the question is, and this is for everyone on the panel, if you've taken an extended break from playing Magic, and I know Kibler has done this, and when you come back, do you just feel like you're kind of out of shape and that you're going to be at a major disadvantage? How do you get back into good Magic shape after an extended break?
Yeah, I mean, as Adrian said, I've taken a number of extended breaks from Magic. I was playing on the Pro Tour for a long time, and then ended up pretty much just stopping playing Magic entirely for about 4 years. That was between pretty much 2005 and 2009. And when I started playing again, I was very much sort of out of playing shape. I played in a bunch of PTQs and such, and kept losing to mistakes of my own in PTQ top 8s and things like that. And I mean, really, the key is just playing a lot again. The way I got good in the first place was I was a kid who just played Magic all the time. And I think that resources like websites and videos and now Magic streaming are all great ways to sort of improve your general Magic knowledge, but there's really no substitute for playing yourself.
Craig, did you ever take a break?
Yeah, I took a few breaks. I think the longest was maybe 2 or 3 years. And it's not always just taking a break. Sometimes maybe you're playing Magic every weekend, going to a PTQ, trying to qualify for the Pro Tour, and then something else happens, and maybe you only go once every month or two. So it's just kind of deprioritizing Magic, and you get the fire again. You're going to tournaments every weekend, and and on break you're writing down deck lists and stuff like that. I'm sure for Lunor Elf.
Dude, you should see the notes on my phone. Yeah. they're mostly, I think, for Arbor Elf from that era.
But to address the question,
Elvish Mystics. That's
yes.
Wild and
So
too.
whenever you get back into Magic, in order to sort of get back into shape, one of the things that I learned from Ben Stark was just to think out loud. So a lot of the things that you go through the thought process and it's just kind of quick once you're like in the zone and you're playing all the time. But then if you haven't played in 6 months and you're trying to get back, just go through the thought process. Be like, okay, well, if you had +2/+2 combat trick, you would have used it last turn in this combat scenario because it would have been really good. So you would have had to have drawn it this turn. So if I wait and try to play around it, I'm putting myself in a bad position, so I'm just going to make the attack. And just speak out loud. And then, eventually you'll go through the thought processes enough to where you'll be able to internalize it, not say it out loud, and it'll just help you get back into shape.
Does that freak your opponent out when you started doing that in your game?
It definitely freaked his opponents out when I was watching him do it. He was getting back into Magic. They're like, oh my god, you just told me what my hand was and you were right.
A scoop.
Shaun, do you have any breaks that you've taken?
I haven't
Insights?
taken like a super break since I've sort of ramped up my competitiveness for a number of years, but I'm a big advocate of mini breaks, like a month-long break or 2 months or like 3 weeks. And during these breaks, I stop playing, but I'm still reading articles, and like Magic is still on my mind, even though I'm not playing. But it's nice to just take a break and like want to start playing again. And I found that sort of my skills have stuck with me even with those little breaks. So I've been happy with those.
I take breaks like 8 hours each night.
I certainly don't have the resume of the other players on this panel, but I know that one of the things that happened for me is that I went to grad school, and during grad school, I'm not sure how everyone else does grad school, but when I was doing grad school, that was probably one of the hardest jobs I've ever had. And just a ton of time doing a ton of stuff that had nothing to do with Magic, and I could feel, even though I was not taking a true break, I wasn't putting it on the front burner. And when I came back after I got my master's and I was done with grad school and I said, never mind, I don't want to even go any further, I'm done. I think one of the things that was most important for me in getting back into Magic shape was just not only getting back into the swing of playing with people, but also just doing the thing where there are, generally speaking, going to be people that have been in the loop, and listening to them, talking to them, playing with people that are better than you. I'm fortunate enough to live in a community where there's a lot of good players. So if you can have access to people that are better than you, that's always a great way to get back in shape. I mean, think about it like working out. If you've ever been somebody that, like I know for me, for example, man, I have gotten out of shape physically speaking compared to where I was, years ago. But getting back into it is just working out and, at best, having a spotter or having people that you can work out with.
And Magic has way less delayed onset muscle soreness.
If you have a question, can you raise your hands? Over there, sir.
For the panel, if you were going to reprint and add to the modern card pool 1 or 2 cards that are currently not legal, like just legacy cards, what would you want to add to expand the format?
Okay, the question is, if you were going to reprint 1 or 2 cards that are not currently available in Modern, what would you reprint? I'm going to start with Toby Elliott. What would you reprint?
You don't want me.
Humility.
No, humility is actually fine.
You heard it. They're reprinting it.
I'd actually be fine with humility coming back in the form. You see, if I had my way, I'd be reprinting stuff like cultural exchange. So I'm not the person to ask about that sort of thing.
I'm still curious, though.
No, that's what I mean.
Cultural exchange. Can you tell people what cultural exchange is in case they don't know?
Let's you exchange any number of your creatures with any number of your opponent's creatures. So yeah, I mean, I'm a commander player, so I'm not really focused on what would make for good, diverse, modern pools.
And aren't you on the Commander rules team?
Yeah.
Okay, you can send your complaints about it. Soul Ring. So Shaun McLaren, what would you bring?
I'm having trouble thinking of anything that isn't going to be busted, but to keep the theme of ridiculously powerful format of white enchantments, I would want Moat in the format.
The most fun card around.
That was my tamest suggestion, all right?
Ask for Tabernacle while you're at it.
Craig Wescoe, what would you have
Well, I would
reprinted?
also choose a white card. Mine would be Mother of Runes.
That's a good one.
Yes.
That's a good one.
That would be
I
amazing.
think that there would be very good reason for it, actually. Because the problem that I mentioned before of Wild Nacatl sort of warping all the non-affinity aggressive decks as just being zoo decks, if you print a card like Mother of Runes, which isn't especially good in a zoo strategy, it's going to open up all sorts of new things. It's a human, so it'll work in sort of Champion of the Parish type decks, which obviously you know what I'd be playing. But it also does things against, say, all these Jund decks, where you play a first turn Mother of Runes, and if they don't have the Lightning Bolt for it right away, suddenly you're the one 2-for-1ing the Jund deck, instead of them 2-for-1ing you with all their spells. And so I think that would really make the aggressive decks way better. It would also give you a way to evade past all of the Wall of Roots and stuff like that from the Birthing Pod decks and all the Scavenging Ooze and Tarmogoyfs from, I guess, the Twin decks now are running all those. And so I think just having a card like Mother of Runes, a really powerful 1-drop white creature with really good ability, I think that would really open up the format a lot, and it wouldn't be too powerful.
Brian?
It's kind of funny because I was actually going to say Sylvan Safekeeper, which is, kind of a more fair version of Mother of Runes. But yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that is a sort of oppressive element of modern toward creature decks is just how good the spells are. Like Lightning Bolt is ridiculous, and Lightning Helix is also super powerful, and Path to Exile is super powerful. So you end up in this situation where if you want to play any sort of interesting creatures, you're either playing some sort of combo deck like Pod or Twin or whatever, or you're mostly losing. And I think having access to something like Sylvan Safekeeper can allow you to actually play things like 3-drop creatures or 2-drop creatures that aren't just Tarmogoyf. And be able to potentially keep them around against stuff like Path to Exile without also just, locking out the cards in people's hands like Mother of Runes would do.
Could you bring back Fires?
Fires, do you have one? I don't think it would be good.
No, one more.
I would reprint Destructive Flow.
You probably need to explain that one.
Destructive Flow is an enchantment for red, green, black, and during each player's turn they have to sacrifice a non-basic land. So, could you raise your hand if you have a question? In the hat right there.
It seems like Modern has really strong hosers for their sideboard and stuff, and I was wondering if that maybe changed the dynamic of how you aggressively mulligan, because you have certain cards that can just win the game if you draw it, like your hate card versus their hate card. And I know some pros have written some articles about how they don't even like Modern because of how strong the hate is.
Okay, the question is, with all of the strong hoser cards, or all of the strong cards that can hate on people's strategies, is aggressive mulliganing a more important thing to do in the format? And that's apparently for everyone, so if you...
Yes. No, I mean, it's absolutely true that there are certain matchups in which an individual card can be you win or you lose. Like say you're playing some sort of aggressive deck against a Storm deck. It's like, well, I have 2 Rule of Laws or Eidolon of Rhetorics or whatever in my sideboard, and your hand that has a generally reasonable creature curve and some spells isn't going to win the game. So I do think that there are lots of matchups where it's very important to aggressively mulligan to specific cards, based on what's in your deck, what's in their deck. And I do think that can make the actual gameplay of some of those games less fun, which I think is what a lot of people have complained about with regard to that. There's less sort of dynamic things happening. It's not like I played this and had this interesting interaction with this. It's like, well, I drew Rule of Law, so I won.
Anyone else?
I actually take that different standpoint. For example, if I'm playing blue-white-red control and I'm against Affinity Insight and Stony Silence, and I see my opener and it's maybe mediocre, reasonable, maybe it could be a good affinity draw, maybe not, I would tend to keep it. Like I said before, consistency. Hope they make a mistake instead of me mulliganing into my Stony Silence, trying to mulligan into my Stony Silence and losing that way. That's just sort of how I see it.
I think that also sort of speaks to a difference in terms of the general way in which aggressive decks and control decks interact with their opponents, though. A deck like Blue Air Control, you could just have an Electrolyze and your opponent has a certain kind of draw and you just beat them. when you're playing against Affinity. Whereas if you're playing, say Zoo, your Wild Nacatl is very unlikely to be able to beat them on its own. So you are more reliant on needing to draw something like a Rule of Law against Storm because of the way in which the cards that you have interact with theirs, which is, generally speaking, they don't.
I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing that there's hate cards in the format, because since Modern is such a big format, there's almost in every case a counter to that hate card if you expect it. So if you're an Affinity deck, you should show up to the tournament with a plan against Stony Silence. And for instance, I was playing against Alexander Hayne in a feature match at Grand Prix. I mulliganed to Stony Silence. I implemented that strategy. I was like, oh, found the Stony Silence, and my 5-card hand, guess it's good. And he's just like, turn one, thought CC. I'm like, whoops. Because he came prepared. And so, no matter what you're doing, if maybe it's an Echoing Truth, if you're a combo deck like Storm or some sort of twin deck or whatever, where maybe you don't know exactly what you're going to have to face, but you know that you need to bounce it to their hand in order to go off. And so there's all sorts of good, effective answers if you can predict what you have to face post-board. So anyone who's deterred from the format for that reason, I think they're just not looking deeply enough into the format.
I'm one of those people perhaps not looking deeply enough into Modern, I guess. I know one of the things I love about Legacy is I feel like there's more counter hosers to people's hosers. So, with the existence of blasts like Red Elemental Blast, Pyroblast, that kind of thing, versus whatever the problematic card might be, I feel like your answers to hosers in Modern are Thoughtseize, Abrupt Decay, maybe a bounce spell, or if you're Tron, Oblivion Stone. Sometimes I just feel, for me as someone who has not had much success in Modern, I feel sad about it personally, but I also have not had very much success in Modern. I think a couple of day twos, nothing particularly special. So, could raise your hand if you have a question. Go ahead, sir.
What is the biggest mistake you see people making in Modern?
Okay, and the question is, what is the biggest mistake that you see people making in Modern?
Not calling a judge.
Yes, that is the biggest mistake I think you can make in a tournament, is not calling a judge when you should, which is oftentimes.
I'd say in general, just sackland interactions. I find myself constantly questioning which lands I'm choosing at all times, and when I'm searching for them, whether they're tapped, that sort of thing, whether I wait to see another draw step. So I'd say sacklands are pretty difficult and everywhere. So
I think specifically Modern, there's the general things that the big mistakes people make, which is like just not mulliganing well or whatever. But specific to Modern, I think that in a lot of cases players play too scared against the combo decks. I see a lot of players, particularly players playing aggressive decks, who will just not ever tap their mana when their opponent is in a position where maybe they could go off. And they end up putting them in a position where, even if their opponent doesn't have their combo, they're not going to be able to win anyway because they're not actually developing their board and, actually influencing the game enough because they're just trying to hold up their removal spell.
Okay, so I'm going to play off what Shaun was talking about with a common fetch land interaction, that even though it might not be a mistake per se, it's something that a lot of people are doing wrong. So a whole bunch of decks in the format are playing the fetch land, shock land, mana base, whatever you're playing. Now, whenever you draw your opening 7, instead of just being like, yep, I got a couple fetch lands, a shock land, spells, keep, and then they go, all right, play your first turn. You're like, okay, so now what do I want to fetch? I want to, So just like when you draw your hand, think, okay, what's my game plan? What land am I playing first? What am I fetching? Why am I doing that? Can I get all the colors of mana I need to cast all my spells? Okay, I have a game plan. Keep. So then it's like, okay, take your turn. You're like, all right, here's what I'm doing. You have your whole plan. Because if you say keep, and then you start trying to take your first turn, you're like, wait, no, I can't do that. I have 2 awkward shock lands, and maybe I should have mulliganed. Just think through your thing before you keep, and then play your, I think that's sort of the most straightforward general piece of advice.
Once again, if you could raise your hand right there, sir.
Yeah. I'm just curious, without giving away what you guys are probably going to be playing, what decks are you guys least favorite to looking? You don't want to play against right now.
Okay. And the question is, what decks are you least looking forward to playing against?
I think generally speaking, one of my least favorite decks to play against in Modern is Leonard Coin. for the reason that I was just saying, is that it's the sort of deck that it has a bunch of early interaction and it threatens to kill you out of anywhere. Some games you just kind of lose, and it's just like, oh well, that wasn't particularly fun. It's not necessarily that it's a particularly hard matchup, but just the way in which games frequently play out, particularly with the sort of decks that I tend to play. It's not the kind of games that I enjoy.
Craig?
One of the toughest decks to prepare against is Storm. This might be because I was testing against Andrew Shroud, who just always has a different sideboard plan. But if you want to beat the actual storming, he could be killing you with Grape Shot or Empty the Warrens. So you're like, well, I guess I keep in my Master Impulse to beat Empty the Warrens. And then they might just beat you down with Electromancers if you take out all your spot removal. So, okay, maybe I leave in some spot removal. And they're like, well, okay, you play this Cage first turn, Rest in Peace second turn, and I'm just like attack you with Goblin Electromancer. And you're just like, well, I guess I shouldn't have sided out on my removal spells. So it's just kind of like this weird deck that'll just beat you out of nowhere. You Thoughtseize away all their cards, they have no cards in hand, and then they have this, what's the enchantment?
Ascension.
Yeah, Ascension on the board with one counter. They draw a cantrip, play it, put a counter on their Ascension, draw into another spell, cast it, double it, draw some more cards, and just go off. And you're just like, how did this happen?
I actually had a game last night when I was playing on Magic Online where my opponent had an Ascension, no cards in hand. I'm just like, and I actually didn't notice that I drew a Thundermaw Hellkite that was going to be lethal. This, by the way, has to do with my distaste for the Moto Beta interface. But, I'm like, oh, he's probably just going to draw, Manamorphose and combo off right now, and literally, Manamorphose, combo off, kill you. And I'm just like, oh, probably should have played that Thundermaw.
Shaun?
Well, I was going to say Storm too, because it's always a nightmare to play against, but for me specifically, fairies. Like, when they announced they were unbanning Bitter Blossom, I just felt terrible. That card on turn 2 single-handedly beats every deck I've ever played. Yeah, so fortunately, Fairy's not that great, so don't play it.
Quick show of hands out there. Anyone playing Fairies? Okay, just right there.
See you in the park.
Toby, what deck do you not want to have to come over and talk to the players about?
They got rid of eggs, so. I'm mostly concerned with a smooth running tournament. A smooth running tournament is a tournament in which people are having fun. And so if there's a tournament where we're having 20-minute round turnarounds or worse, that's just not, my favorite deck in the format is probably Affinity, because it's good or I like it or I want to play it, but it ends rounds really quickly.
Were you in Richmond?
I was not in Richmond.
Okay. For a quick show of hands, not for people that have questions, from the audience, who's playing Control tomorrow? Okay, we got a couple Control people. Who's playing an aggressive deck of whatever variety?
Yeah!
Any mid-range people out there? Mid-range of different kinds? I see some.
Also, yeah.
Any combo people? And again, anyone not know what they're playing at all?
What about white weenie people?
That's aggressive. Okay, we've only got a few minutes left, so looking for a last couple of questions. Back in the back, in the red shirt.
Initial concept or initial design of Modern, Adrian Jason Maestro to keep the format from warping back into past standard formats. Now that Modern has had time to evolve, do you think Jason Maestro is really powerful in the current format if you were on Bank?
Okay, and the question is, initially when they were trying to sculpt the format, they banned Jace the Mind Sculptor because of its power level, but given how the various different decks have emerged and how the format has developed, could Jace be unbanned?
Jace is way too powerful. It will literally sculpt the format around it. Like, it will change the way decks are built. That's how I feel. And Control will rise again.
Yeah, I'm a pretty die-hard aggressive player, and I was actually advocating for the unbanning of Jace because I'm the type of player that I want everyone to be playing the same Control deck, because then I know exactly what I need to do to beat them. And I don't think Jace is going to make them too good to where I can't beat them, because there's a whole bunch of ways in Modern to beat a Jace if you absolutely want to. And so I want people to just play with their favorite card and, spend $800 on a playset of Jace. I'm all for that.
I second this opinion. I was wrong. This is right.
I mean, I think that it's possible that maybe Jace could be safe to unban, but I think that the unbanning of a card as iconic and expensive and that has such a storied history and is as infamous as Jace is, if it then became a problem and had to be unbanned, it would be an absolute disaster.
Yep.
And I think that for that reason alone, it won't get unbanned for a long time.
Okay. Raise your hand if you have a question. Also in the back, dark hair on the aisle.
I mean, if it were green, it would never have been that good.
So my question is for the panel. I always try to ask this question when I'm watching Phil's stream. What do you think is the most important quality or aspects of the game that one needs to improve on to take the game to the next level?
Okay, and the question is, what is the most important aspect of your game to work on so you can improve and get to the next level?
I don't know if it's really an aspect of your game per se, but I think it's the most important quality a person can have in terms of improving, and I think it is a willingness to recognize when they're wrong and a desire to learn. I think that so many Magic players view themselves as way better than they actually are. You see people, who they play in PTQs regularly, and they, you always hear them complaining about how they got mana screwed, and if only they were luckier, they would win all the time or whatever. And they're wrong. I mean, yes, they may have drawn too many land in this game, but if they had mulliganed or if they played slightly differently, there's a very good chance they could have won. And this is something that happens to players at all levels of skill, but primarily at players who are sort of in the sort of, they're good enough to occasionally top 8 PTQs, but don't do well in the Pro Tour, don't necessarily do well at Grand Prix. And it is just the most important thing is recognizing that you're not as good as you think you are, and a desire to want to get better.
Yeah, and I would also, you mentioned streaming. I think watching people who are better than you play is one of the best things you can do. And don't just watch, but watch thinking, trying to understand why they made the decisions they made. So I see a lot of people going, oh, this guy's an idiot. How's he a pro? He made this mistake. And then 2 turns later, they're like, oh, I get it now. It's like he was playing around that card that I never thought to play around. Well, if you just instead go in with the attitude thinking, I just want to understand why he's making the plays he's making, or she's making the plays she's making, then I think that's going to vastly improve your chances of learning the way Brian was talking about. So just watching people play, if let's say you finish your match early this weekend, walk over to the feature match area and just start watching one of the players and try to understand the plays that they're making.
I think that's such a complex question. I think there are literally 200 different answers that someone could give, and I would go, yeah, that's the right answer, because there are so many aspects to Magic. My advice would be, do what works for you, figure out what works for you, and keep doing it.
The one thing I've seen for people that stagnate is that they stop listening to people. So listen to other people. Even if someone isn't as good as you, they might still be right.
And trust in yourself and only do what you want.
Brian has the right answer.
You're all wrong other than me.
Well, one thing I found that...
The judge said so.
He's right, yes.
It's the final ruling.
The one thing I found that will really improve players is understanding the stack. A lot of players learn to play Magic just through examples, and they know, oh, well, when this happens, I can do this thing. And they often, because they don't understand the stack as well as they should, they don't realize I have 4 more options in hand that I can do a lot of outplaying with. It's actually it's a fairly complicated beast, and understanding how to use it and how to leverage it in your play is a very important skill.
Cool. So that's all the time we have for questions. I want to thank everyone here that came, and if you could give our panel a round of applause. Shaun McLaren, Toby, Elliott. I'm Adrian Sullivan, the host here for our first Planestalkers. I'm hoping there are going to be many more of these going forward at other events.
Talk about planes. We never talked about
But thank you guys for coming. I'm really glad that we were able to have this event for you. Thanks to Legion Events, and I hope that you all have a really great Grand Prix Minnesota. If you get a chance, go out in the town. It's kind of a fun place to be.